Welcome back to Sets and Reps. I come bearing gifts. This is episode number 6, How to Be a Responsible Gun Owner, featuring my boss, Mr. Shelby Young. Now, if the title of this video causes you any concern or you are 100% against the use and possession of firearms for self-defense or proficiency, this is my disclaimer, and I politely caution you against viewing or listening to this episode. But on the other hand, if you have reservations about the topic and still have an open mind, the points that we discuss may be very informative for you and shed a light on a lot of things. You may learn a lot. We talk about things to keep in mind when picking your first weapon. We talk about whether gun safes are worth it for the home. We talk about certain home defense situations and making sure that you educate family members on the substantial reason that guns are in the home and what they are used for. And we basically made this episode to ensure with 100% certainty that you know what you're doing, or basically reinforce the fact that you need to know what you're doing before you pick the weapon up. We also talk about preferences for carrying the gun and for storing the weapon. We talk about the 4 universal rules for gun safety and some recommendations of instructional classes. So, without further ado, I want to get this episode rolling. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you learn a lot. Welcome back to Sets and Reps, everybody. This is my guest, Shelby Young. I want to just give him a warm welcome. How are you today this morning, my friend?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. I heard from a member the other day, and I didn't know this fact before, but it makes sense to me. Were you named after the car? The Shelby car?
Yeah. My dad has a classic Shelby Mustang. That's his pride and joy. So that's what I'm named after.
That's pretty cool. That's like a powerful name, I feel like. And did you see the car movie, the Shelby or the Ford versus Ferrari? Is that what it's called?
Ford versus Ferrari. Yeah,
Ford
that was really
Ferrari.
good.
Yeah,
I was impressed by that. When I was in high school when the Gone in 60 Seconds remake came out, so that's where most people were like, "Oh, wow," because before it got made fun of my name quite a bit. So
really
cool to get a little bit of redemption because they're like, "Okay, it's kind of cool, I guess." Yeah.
Oh, were people like, oh, that sounds like a girl's name and crap like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Exactly. But yeah, kids are kids. Whatever.
Absolutely. I want to thank you very much for coming on. I think you, of all people, are a pretty particularly good person to talk about our topics today with. I've been working with you for a while now at Hampshire Hills. You are one of the most enjoyable people to work with. You provide a very professional and kind of trustworthy work environment. So I just want to give you another shout out for that. What I want to get into today is going to be pretty good for a lot of our listeners because it's a topic I feel like maybe isn't necessarily talked about as much as it should be. And I know it would be helpful to a lot of people. I recently purchased my first firearm. I want to say it's been a year and a half now, and I've been loving, shooting it and learning how to aim well with it and make sure that I'm being a responsible gun owner and keeping myself safe, keeping my family safe. And I know that you also own a gun, right?
Yeah, I purchased my first one a few years ago, but it's something that I'd started shooting a few years before that. I had some friends that were in law enforcement, military, and things like that, so they would take me out to the range and work with me on that. And I was lucky enough to where my firearms instructor had been an instructor at Sig Sauer Academy and started his own private handgun, self-defense, and lots of other things mixed in. He's since shut down that program, but he's still very much involved with it.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And so, did he help you at all when you were picking your weapon that you were going to buy for the first time?
Somewhat, because when I took his handgun 101 course, it was using simunition pistols, which for those people that don't know, it's a firearms instructor specific kind of tool. That it's basically a Glock 19, a regular Glock 19 that just has a different receiver put on it so it can fire simunition rounds, which they look like just a regular 9mm shell, but then it's got a little ball of pink paint on the end of it. And so you still get to practice all of your same techniques because it's the same weight and feel as a regular Glock 19, because the only thing that's different is the slide on top. And they hurt. So when we were doing the close quarters training, you definitely know when you screwed up because it doesn't feel nice. But
like the same technology as like paintball, pretty much, right? But probably smaller.
Yeah, definitely smaller, and yeah, it's because even the most realistic paintball gun is still pretty far away from what a real firearm actually feels like. So it was definitely cool to get to work with that. And then the firearm I wound up choosing for my first one was also a striker fired 9mm. So that's why it was a different brand. I went with a SIG instead of a Glock, but it just happened to be out of availability and a couple other small features that I liked the SIG had over the Glock. But they're both excellent. Yeah. So
very cool. Yeah, I wanted to get a SIG in the future. What would you recommend I get the one that you purchased?
I've definitely enjoyed it. It's I know it had a little bit of a reputation because of a defect from an older model, which unfortunately that wound up being the model that a lot of law enforcement and military were using as well. They've since corrected that. So SIG, their reputation stands for themselves. They're a pretty amazing brand, and the fact that they're located right here in New Hampshire is pretty cool.
Oh, that is cool. What was the defect that
if you had a round in the chamber and it was dropped sharply and landed at just the right angle, then the firearm could accidentally discharge.
Oh, wow. That's not a good thing.
No, it's not a good thing. So, but that's why they went back to the drawing board. They stand by their product. So they corrected everything they needed to. And now they're saying they're way above board again.
Very good. Yeah. So I have a Smith & Wesson 9mm, and it's the M&P.
Mm-hmm.
And when I bought it, it was kind of the first gun that I walked in the store and saw, and it kind of jumped out to me. And then when I was holding it and testing it out, like checking it out, it felt right for me. The only thing about it that is a little like not frustrating, but it just takes some work or takes some getting used to, is the trigger. It's just has a little bit of an extra pull. So for someone who was starting off shooting and not really too used to it yet, it's kind of tough because it took a little bit of extra effort to pull the trigger down. No safety on that, so that's probably why. But was it kind of the same thing for you when you bought that? Like, was it one that jumped out to you and you were just like, that's the one that I'm gonna get?
Yeah, I'd fired a few SIGs before that some of my friends had used, and I've used a lot of different firearms over the years. The 1911 platform from Smith & Wesson is actually my favorite handgun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a nice, big, heavy, reliable pistol, and chambered in 45, and it's even at that caliber, it absorbs all the recoil. It's just a really nice, fun gun to shoot. But I also wanted something that I could potentially have as a concealed carry if need be, and the 1911 is just for that. So even I wound up going with a 320 medium from SIG, which is it's a little smaller than the full size. Their 320 is kind of their idea of the 1911 platform.
Mhm.
So it was already one that I was kind of comfortable with. Um, but yeah, it wound up being that it was the gun that I was looking for at the time that I had a friend who was selling it, and it worked out well. But I'd shot some P229s before, which a lot of people consider to be like the greatest handgun ever made, and it is. It's a fantastic firearm. Um, so I wasn't unfamiliar with SIGs, and like you said, it was kind of one of those. The first time I shot, I went, yeah, this is the one. It's buying your first firearm it's kind of like buying your first car. Like, you have to do your research, you have to test drive a few, you have to kind of get a feel for it. But when you know, like, there's a lot of different factors that go into choosing your first one, which is why anytime somebody, you know me, I don't like to speak in absolutes. So when you have somebody tell you like, this is the gun, like this is the one that everybody should get, everybody should do this, everybody's different.
Yeah.
Everybody different body types, different hand sizes. The size of the person shooting the firearm makes a big difference. There's a lot of things that, or like you said, the weight of the trigger pull is a big thing. If you have short fingers, arthritic fingers, if you've got a lack of strength, there's a lot of reasons why a big heavy 1911, as much as I love it, is not right for a lot of people. So there's so many things that go into choosing your first firearm, and we're going to talk about a lot of these today. Of what's your home scenario? Do you have kids? What's your neighborhood like? How, even things that most people don't think about, like how wide are your hallways and your doorways if you're planning to use as an in-home defense gun. There's a lot of things that go into that.
I definitely want to get into in-home defense and some of the things that should be considered when you're buying a gun for home defense or keeping it in a secure spot for home defense. But yeah, thank you for all those things. Those are important things that beginners buying their first weapon should keep in mind. It should be something that fits well for them as their person. And they can't just be like a one size fits all. It's not. There's a lot of things that shouldn't be one size fits all, and especially in like the job that we do, we know that in particular. So let's get into a little bit of what it takes. Like, after you've purchased your firearm, what are some of the best practices to make sure that you are being a responsible gun owner? And I'd like to maybe break this down into like 5 easy things that people can remember. I'd say, like, I can say one, and then you can let me know what you think about this. Just like, sure. keeping it in a good, safe spot is a good tip, right? That should be one.
Yeah, absolutely.
These don't have to be in any particular order either.
No, yeah, and we'll talk about a little bit later kind of what the idea of a safe spot is, whether vehicle or home or things like that. I was going to go over, if you don't mind, there's what a lot of people consider to be the 4 universal rules of firearm safety.
Let's do that.
Yeah,
the four universal rules of firearm safety. Perfect.
So first one is assume that every firearm is real and loaded.
Yes, 100%. That's a good one.
The number of people who have been shot by unloaded firearms is kind of ridiculous, because one guy goes, "Oh, it's not loaded," and they hand it to you, and if you don't check it yourself, every firearm is loaded until you have personally, both visually and physically, checked the chamber and the mag well. Like, there's really no substitute for this. That you should eject the magazine, rack the slide. If it's a semi-automatic pistol, if it's a revolver, same thing. Roll the cartridge or roll the chamber out. Make sure that you can see that it's empty, and actually put your hand up and put your finger up inside there too, to make sure that there's not a round that's been temporarily lodged in there, because there have been a lot of really awful mishaps over the year. Brandon Lee, the son of Bruce Lee, died from a firearm mishap that happened on the set of The Crow. That
crazy to me, like that, because that was supposed to be like wasn't that supposed to be a blank that was fired?
This is one of these things it's kind of now become almost a legend of Hollywood lore. So they were using I believe it was a 44 Magnum, because of course, it's the dirty hairy gun. It's big, it's impressive. Everybody loves the look of the Smith and Wesson 44 Magnum. But they had to cut corners on a couple of the things. So they had rounds where they had pulled all of the powder out. So it was just to look like, hey, here's an impressive bullet to show on screen. And then they had dummy rounds where they would just remove the head off the bullet. So when you pulled the trigger, you had a big loud bang and some muzzle flash, and it looked impressive. The problem was on one of the dummy rounds, they had pulled the trigger and the powder was out, but they had left the primer on the end of the round. So the primer was enough to push the head of the bullet into the barrel of the gun. And then when the next round was just a powder round, so it had no head on it, it was basically like him getting shot by a full 44 round.
Gosh, was that instant kill, or did he, sustain wounds?
I don't know. I don't know how long it took after that, but that's from granted. Like this was also a long time ago that I was doing research on this, so
yeah,
there might have been new information developed since then. Because like when you talk to his family, every time they've done interviews, they always talk about whether it's about Bruce or Brandon Lee. They always say, we choose not to focus on how they died. We want to focus on how they lived, which is a wonderful thing. But it should be a strong testament to that you never really know, what's going on with a firearm until you have personally handled it and checked it yourself.
Absolutely. Just because the nature of the device itself, it doesn't look any different than when it's chambered versus when it's not. So really good tip to keep in mind for number one.
Okay. So number two is that you never point the firearm at anything you're not willing to destroy. And that's, person, object, animal, anything like that, you see a lot of the kind of Mexican standoff stuff in Hollywood. And we'll talk about, some of the movie stuff a little bit later, but where you have people that are just kind of pointing guns at each other and, it's a really tense situation. Then all of a sudden they just bring them down. It's like at any point during that, things could have popped off horribly. So you never jokingly point a gun at anything. It's always, with the intent that if I'm going to aim this at something, it's something I intend to destroy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a childlike thing that like we'd grow up with, like pretending to shoot guns at each other and just like pointing all that. And even if I had a toy gun and I was always around my parents, like even them not being gun owners, they knew that it was a safe thing not to pretend to point something at someone, because it's a real thing, and it's not a toy later on when you do get your hands on a real weapon, obviously. So that's really good.
It's good to build those habits early, and that's part of the thing, that if you're going to own a firearm and have children, then they need to know about it as well. The idea that you're going to keep your gun completely locked away from your kids and they're never going to touch it no matter what, even when you're not home, it's unrealistic to think that. So the earlier that you can start to safely educate kids about what proper firearm safety is, the better, because then they'll already have those habits ingrained in themselves. That, I'm not saying that no kid should ever play with a squirt gun or a Nerf gun or anything like that. I did. They're a whole lot of fun. But that's why, exactly. When I was growing up, it was just kind of at the end of the time of realistic looking toy guns. And they just started to put like the orange end cap onto guns to make them, because there were a lot of mishaps, and it's really tragic where you had kids pointing toy guns at police officers and they looked too real and you didn't know, and you had a kid with a squirt gun get shot accidentally. So, and it's really no fault of the officer. Then just you don't have time to check it to see what's going on. Now, the age of the kid might give you some indication, but in the end, you don't know. Kids find their parents' firearms all the time, and it really is tragic when something like that can happen. And that's an improperly stored firearm, or a poorly educated family, or there's a lot of things about the responsible gun owner, which is everybody likes to think that they are one, but it never hurts to kind of double check yourself and see, am I actually doing all the things that I should be doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. My my brother owns firearms, and he's got five children. So that's
Oh, wow.
something that you know, when do you feel like is the good age to start educating children? Probably when they start to think and process things, right? So maybe like 10 or
I'd even think a little bit earlier than that,
earlier,
because yeah, kids
8 or
will
9, 8.
7 or 8. It's going to be
Yeah,
different for kids. Mature at different ages, so it's same thing. I don't want to put like a hard and fast rule on
yeah,
it.
true.
Um, but if you think of like when you were a little kid, kids are constantly searching through their parents' homes to find things, and most of the times they're trying to find things that their parents don't want them to find. If you think of like searching for, we just had Christmas, searching for your Christmas presents ahead of time, that kind of thing. So the idea that you can hide your guns away in a place that your kids are never going to find them, it's a constant scavenger hunt. Kids are always, as soon as they can climb, you're in trouble. Yeah. When they're small and young, and if you're going to, we'll talk about staging a little bit later, but if you were to stage a rifle up on top of a tall, 6 foot tall cabinet, and your child can't really walk or climb yet, then that's safely out of their reach. Now, there's other factors like if other people are coming into your home and that kind of stuff, but as soon as they can climb, they'll climb anything that they can get their hands on. So and we'll talk about gun safes in a little bit, but that's stuff to keep in mind, is that where you place your firearm is incredibly important, because where you think your kid can't get to, they can. Like, you can never count on that.
Absolutely. What were the other two? What were the other two universal?
So yeah, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire.
Got you.
So all of this got broken down for me into 2 rules before, when I took my first handgun course. So like before you're even allowed to touch the firearm, is muzzle management and trigger finger safety, which kind of covers a lot of the stuff that, like, you don't point the barrel of the weapon at anything that you're not willing to destroy, and your finger stays on the slide on the frame of the weapon, not anywhere inside the trigger guard, not even if it's within the trigger guard, but just off the trigger. Mistakes can still happen. So just keeping it out of that, keep your booger hook off the boomstick, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yes. Keep the boogers off the gun.
And
Yes.
there's that too. Yeah, you don't want boogers on your trigger. And then lastly, it's know your target and what's behind it.
Yeah, because
which is a lot of
people probably don't think about that as much.
No, it's obviously, once again, that's the big thing, and we can talk a little bit about when choosing an in-home firearm, issues of over penetration and that kind of stuff, that things that you have to manage, because it's not just stopping the intruder, but it's also making sure that you don't accidentally injure anyone around you, unintentionally.
The difference between because I've never had like any personal experience with this, but like shooting a hollow point versus just like the opposite of that, right, would just be it's just the regular lead tipped, right? And then which is more likely to like seriously go through like a wall and damage a wall?
Yeah. So the harder the end of the projectile, the more likely it is to over penetrate. And
okay,
that's where there's things that they call like self-defense ammo, which it's designed to enter a body and then expand out. You're trying to cause and trigger warning for anybody who's not who's offended by the talk of like bodily mutilation and death and that kind of. I suppose we should have done that towards the start of the episode.
Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I'll add that in for an introduction.
Might not be a bad idea.
It's hey, I mean, people, it's okay to talk about things that are a little bit on the uncomfortable side. This is like episode 6, so I'm setting the stage. Anything goes. Anything goes here. Sets and reps.
Sets and reps. But yeah, so the idea is that with the self-defense ammo, you're trying to cause as much bodily damage with each round as possible. That's the way that we talk about it. Is you're not shooting to intentionally kill a person, you're shooting to stop them. There's ammunition that's designed to enter the body and then expand out, causing a big wound track.
Yeah.
Which obviously, the bigger the wound track, the fewer rounds you're going to have to use. Which, depending on the firearm that you're using, could be a pretty significant thing. If you have a 15 round magazine versus a 7-round magazine, with the 7-round, obviously you have to make every shot count. Not that with the 15 round that you can just throw away rounds. You never want to do that. But having to reload in the middle of an active engagement is obviously, it's going to cost time, and it leaves you vulnerable for a certain amount of time. So that's certainly something to keep in mind.
Because you want to work with what you got, and that's why I got to make sure your aim is good.
Yeah. Oh, and that's another part of making sure that you're shooting at what you think you're shooting at. And there's a lot of things that happen in high stress situations, things like tunnel vision, what they call auditory exclusion, where you can't hear what's going on around you. So like you talk to military operators, law enforcement, people that have been in these situations, and they talk about literally like they could only see what was in front of them, that everything else around kind of disappears. And that's one of the effects of adrenaline and it affects everybody differently, but you'll also get time distortion. So people will think that things happened faster than they did, or that they happened slower than they did, or maybe didn't happen at all. The mind will do some funny things under really high stress situations. So
yeah, man, that sympathetic nervous system, right? Just kind of taking over.
Exactly.
It's crazy. That's really interesting. I've seen that tunnel vision effect in movies where it's just kind of like everything zooms in on the one thing the person's focusing on, everything else kind of gets blurred. So that's pretty cool. What have you experienced any accidents with your firearm, or any kind of close calls with your firearm that you can note, or have you been around anything?
I personally haven't had any issues with mine, because I've always maintained a healthy respect for firearms. Obviously, I grew up in the '80s. I know we'll talk about movies a little bit later, but I grew up in a time of like hyper violence of Terminator, RoboCop, Rambo, Commando, Predator, all that stuff. So I was always kind of fascinated by the power of guns. When you see them on TV, and it's like, whoa, look at that. But from the very first time that I saw my dad's 22 bolt action rifle, I was like, okay, like I always had a very healthy respect for it. Like kind of like you said, when you were like almost scared the first time to touch your first firearm, that's a good thing. Like that means that you have a healthy respect for it. What tends to happen is people get too comfortable with things that can kill you, and this could be whether it's a firearm, a motorcycle, live electrical wires, a chainsaw. I don't care what it is. I used to do tree work back when I was working at a summer camp while I was in college, and you'd see guys just swinging chainsaws around and just being absolute idiots with it. And it's like this thing will destroy you in horrific ways. Like you can't treat it that way. It's not a toy. Like you have to give it the healthy respect it deserves because of what it can do. And it won't the idea that like firearms are inherently evil. Morality is something that we're going to kind of leave out of this conversation a bit, but in the end, like the user causes the effect. Like the tool itself can't do anything without the user behind it. So, and if the user is, for lack of better words, if they're an idiot, if they're, behaving improperly, then, obviously really horrible things can happen. Accidents do happen. Like I said, I've been lucky where, because I've always kind of maintained that, I've always, check my weapon, make sure that it's clear. We do, follow the 4 universal rules. And the 5th one you can add is just don't be an idiot, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I like that one. We can make an addendum to the 4 universal rules and just make it 5.
Five is don't be an idiot. Yeah. But yeah, I remember being at a friend's house, and one of them pulled out his it was I think it was a 9mm Beretta. But same thing, his friend just like grabs it out of his hand and starts waving it around, and like luckily, the first guy should have never pulled it out. Like there was no reason to. He just kind of wanted to show off, and it's like, once again, it's not a toy. It's not something to be like, oh my God, look at this. Look at how cool this thing is I just got. And the other guy grabbing it out of his hand was inexperienced, and it was loaded with a live round in the chamber. So like he's just kind of waving it around, and I immediately got out of the room. Like, I'm not going to be here for this. Like, you guys settle this. So that's the closest I've come, luckily, to having any kind of an accident with it. And luckily nothing happened. But also being at the range, sometimes you'll see people do stupid things. There's, you probably heard it either called flagging or beaning, but that's, where somebody will be pointing their weapon down range and then will turn and swing it. Maybe they're trying to turn to talk to somebody, but all of a sudden, anything that passes in front of the barrel of that gun, there could potentially, be a discharge. Somebody could die. So that's once again where, muzzle management, trigger finger safety. Like if you could just keep those two things in mind, you'll avoid the vast majority of problems that people run into.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about you?
Just remember, I remember one thing. This is just like the only thing that happened, and it was a result of me being it was like my first time coming in contact with guns, and there was an outing where I was with a bunch of adults. They had we had some handguns, and we were kind of on a family friend's property. He had a bunch of acres, and it's kind of cool about that is that it's like secluded, so there's not a lot of people around, and you can just kind of shoot in your own backyard, basically. So we were just shooting, and I guess like as I was aiming, I was just like I was not being cognizant of where like the position of my gun. I was shooting a little bit too close to the ground in front of me, and it was like, and I hadn't noticed that it was like causing the dirt to kind of pop up like near me, and it wasn't anything that made the situation like too terribly unsafe, but I just had to get verbal external response from other people that were around me, like, oh, like watch where you're aiming, like make sure that you're aiming it up higher. And so that's technique and issues like that. I think probably one of the best ways to work on tightening that up is classes, and kind of making sure you have some instruction from someone that's professional, or at least has a lot more experience than you. I know that you said your friend had he taught classes, right? That in the beginning of the podcast you were mentioning your friend that had taught classes like that. Were they were gun safety or defensive courses?
Both. So he started off as it's my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, John Fain, who runs Triumph Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was working as the hand-to-hand self-defense instructor for 6 Hour Academy, and he'd been around firearms his whole life, so he was already pretty experienced. But they're like, hey, would you want to become a pistol instructor, a rifle instructor, and a firearm and a shotgun instructor as well? So he started taking all of those trainings and applying it with his pretty vast knowledge he already had of empty hand self-defense techniques. And like I said, he was already very experienced with firearms, so it wasn't like his first exposure. So he then started to teach classes up there, and then eventually he and some other instructors opened up their own academy that they were teaching handgun safety and things like that. And so he ran them right out of Triumph. And so as soon as he was like, yeah, I'm doing handgun 101, I'm like, all right, sign me up. Like, let's do this. Because there was somebody I already, know and trusted and respected. So that that really, it made me able to feel comfortable. And I was impressed because when I got there, he wasn't running the show. There was another instructor he had working for him who was far more experienced than he was, both with a wider variety of firearms and in live fire situations, because he'd been both in the Navy and then done a lot of personal bodyguardish or things like private security stuff all over the world, and had, this one of those guys that when you talk to, it's like you've seen some stuff. There's some people that you talk with them and it's like, okay, like you've been involved in some really heavy situations and you've come out of it alive and you've learned a lot from it. So that's somebody that you can always learn something from, because they've been to those kind of dark, awful things that most of us will never have to deal with, and they've come out of it with some life lessons that will stay with you forever.
Yeah, huge respect to those people. Probably the best people to like work in those situations of instruction, because just like you said, they've been through those situations. So if you were to recommend like a class to someone who's a novice at firearms, and would you say that a safety course is like a must? Or
100%.
yeah.
Yeah. I really don't like, unless, a lot of people talk about, well, I teach my, like I taught my kids. It's like, unless you are yourself, law enforcement, or have been active military, or, have just been involved in that kind of a thing, I really feel there's no substitute for learning from someone who's a professional. Like, it's kind of like, when you and I see a dad coming into the gym and trying to teach their kid how to lift, just because, dad's been lifting, for a long period of his life. Just because you've been doing something for a long time doesn't mean that you've been doing it correctly. And that's always the thing to keep in mind, is that experience and quality don't always go hand in hand. So
True.
I think a lot of times, as we find as well, you could have a dad who does actually know quite a bit about, fitness and lifting technique and a lot of things, and the kid just doesn't want to listen because it's his dad. That it's easier to take instruction from somebody who you're not related to. It's the same reason why, like, you see couples training together, and most of the time it doesn't work terribly well, because there's you're now changing the power dynamic from something that may have once been a level playing field. Now you have somebody who's like, well, no, I'm in charge of this situation. So there's that kind of thing that goes along with it as well. So that's why a lot of times having somebody who's a neutral party, somebody who's just outside, and who's also a specialist, that it's like, if they are a firearms instructor and this is all they do, they will probably have tips and tricks for teaching and training that even a very experienced parent has never heard of before.
Of course, yeah. Perfect. And then the safety course, or I'm sorry, the defensive course kind of goes beyond the safety course, right? Because you have an opportunity to learn about situations that you may be in and how to best deal with them. So I have yet to take a safety course, but I'm very interested in taking a defensive course, because I've had like a little bit of experience with my own firearm and I'm feeling a lot more comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to learn about what to do in different situations like that. So yeah, would you agree that defensive course is like a secondary thing that you should take, like um, after you become more comfortable with how to be safe with your firearm?
Yeah. And I know I've talked a lot about Sig Sauer, but it's because I respect them a lot. But their academy has stratified skill levels. So starting at like 101, bare basics, you've either only had very little experience with a firearm, or maybe you've never touched one before, and they go over, all of the mechanics of the weapon, ways to make it function, ways to make it malfunction, how to clear malfunctions, all of these different things, the 4 universal rules. And then next level up from that, you'll get into, drawing and shooting more effectively, cleaning up technique errors. It's there's so many things that are natural but inherently wrong. Like when you draw the firearm of bringing your arm straight up in front of you is, to try to meet the sights to your sight line
Right.
is not how you would want to do that. The same thing, especially because if you were doing that in a real life situation, then it means that you're pointing it at somebody. Once again, you're pointing at somebody or something that you intend to destroy. So if that person or an animal, if that's, although you wouldn't usually use a handgun to hunt an animal, and we can talk about that, like using the right tool for the right job. But if something's advancing on you, you don't want to have your full arm length come straight up in front of you, because then the swing and the time and everything, it doesn't match up well. Instead, you want to bring it up to your chest and extend out from there. So almost
So that's
pressing
like
it out in my position.
that's like a meter too. Like they can see it happening,
Yeah,
right? And it's a lot slower.
it's a lot slower, and it takes you longer to actually get the barrel on target. Because if you think of the time, so if I start with my hands pointing straight down, as I'm bringing it up, if I have to fire early, I'm going to shoot at the ground, or maybe only hit somebody in the leg. But versus if I draw and then bring it to my stomach, the barrel's already now at center mass. So even if I have to fire with my hands tucked in tight to my chest, it's already pointing at potentially vital targets. And then from there, they call it railing. I can rail in or out depending on how close my target is to me. But the barrel is still pointing at the exact same spot, whether it's in tight to my chest or straight out away from me. It's still center mass. Does that make sense?
Definitely. Keeping it close to your center of gravity and having more control over it in that way. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Definitely.
And that's a really good way to put it, is control. Is that two hands on. Trying to shoot one handed like you see in the movies is it's risky at best. And they're trying to shoot whether you're think you're a Wild West cowboy or something out of a John Woo movie where you've got a gun in each hand and dual wielding, double tapping, all that.
So what's your preference as far as like holster position? I have a sticky holster. It's the kind that you can kind of put it in your pants and it won't move, and it's got that resistance to it. And I like to I haven't walked out in public with it yet, but I would keep it in the back of my pants just to kind of practice with it. Do you prefer that, or do you prefer having it in the front at your hip?
So
when you wear a holster.
Is yours is yours in pocket or is it waistband?
It's in pocket.
Okay.
I know there's a difference between.
Yeah, which position that you carry in it's very personal. So some people say appendix carry above all else, which is if you were to think of your body as a clock, kind of like 2 o'clock would be appendix carry. So kind of above your front pocket in your waistband is where majority of people who like to conceal carry will keep it. Some people like it more at 4 o'clock, kind of back behind the hip, and there's different reasons for that. That if you were sitting down, then appendix can be tougher to access. You have to either straighten your leg out or stand up in order to pull it. In pocket, obviously, same thing. You could run into that depending on how flexed your hip is, how tight the area is. So like being in your car, then in pocket, if you had to draw quickly, could be tough from in there. There's the traditional shoulder holsters you'll see most of the time are crossbody draw, and same thing. Some people like cross front waist draw, although that tends to be quite a bit more rare. And then more kind of back towards like 5 or 6 o'clock, you'd have a reverse hand position would be another way to go about it. So it's stuff that most people don't think about, and you don't be like obsessed about it, and we're constantly going, should it be 4 or 4:30 or just whichever position you decide to carry at. It's just something you have to practice with. Practice your drawing technique, and you can do it from both standing and sitting, and just to kind of get a feel for what's going to be the most natural to you. The firearms instructor that I had, the former Navy guy, I remember him making a joke where somebody was like, so like, what do you think of carrying a backup piece on your ankle? And he's like, dude, I'm fat. He's like, there's no way that I'm going to be reaching down to my toes to grab a piece from my ankle in any sort of a way. He's like, so instead, I keep my main one at appendix. And he's like, and I have my backup piece behind actually in a reverse grip at 7 o'clock, because he was comfortable enough having done it for so many years that he could shoot with either hand. It was also from doing a lot of bodyguarding and escorting that if he needed his right hand, to move the person he was protecting out of the way, then he needed to be able to draw and engage with his left hand. So but that's obviously not what your average person is going to have to do. If you want to work on that, that'd be obviously a way more advanced technique. But that he found that for the situations that he was in, that kind of wound up being his best thing, is having appendix carry and 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
So
that must be a stressful job, huh? Being a bodyguard. Jeez.
Yeah, exactly. Because then you're a human shield. Your job is to keep somebody else alive, but obviously you have to keep yourself alive to keep that other person alive too. So it's not a job I would want, but hey, more power to the people that do it and do it well.
We talked about the things that are great to keep in mind owning a gun and buying one for the first time. But do you remember any notions that you had before you purchased one that either you learned better than your notion that you had before, like you proved yourself wrong, or was it all just kind of based on research? You were pretty much got what you were expecting. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, prior to really digging into some of the research and trying out a bunch of different firearms and deciding what it was that I actually wanted to purchase, I had the idea, like a lot of people do, that that bigger is better. That you wanted to have the biggest, most impressive, most intimidating weapon that you could find. So at the time, I was looking at the Desert Eagle 50 caliber, which anybody who's like fans of the Matrix, that's the agents use Desert Eagle 50s, and it's this giant shiny hand cannon that is really expensive, only holds I think 7 rounds, and the recoil will hurt like hell. I don't care how tough you are. It's gonna be rough. So it's one of those things where it looks big and impressive, and it's probably I've shot a few 50 caliber handguns at different events, and they're fun, but it's not practical. It's not something that I would ever actually own, just because the amount of use that I would actually get from it would be pretty limited, and it's certainly nothing that I would ever carry as a self-defense tool. And even I say fun, after 4 or 5 rounds, it hurts. Like exactly. Yeah, your
hand hurts. Yeah,
you don't
the meat.
even. Yeah. One of the last events I was at, a guy had a Smith & Wesson 500, which it looks like the Dirty Harry 44 Magnum on steroids. And he even said he's like, I only bring it out for things like this. He's like, for other people to shoot. He's like, I don't even like shooting it. He's like, I have it just for things like this. Because you fire 1 or 2 rounds out of it and your arm's instantly tired. So I don't care how tough you are.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I fired a 50 caliber revolver once or twice, and definitely just seems like the type of gun that you just shoot for fun and not practical for home defense at all. So
no, not at all.
So real quick, let's touch on the gun safe issue. I know that they're pretty expensive, but I also know that again, it probably depends on which one you buy and what brand, but they seem like a really surefire way to keep your weapons secure, especially if you can lock it and have like a personal combination or something like that only
Well, that's something to kind of keep in mind, is that once again, you got to look at your situation of, are you somebody who thinks that you're going to have to draw your firearm in your home under duress in a very short amount of time. Because security and accessibility are kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum from each other. Because obviously, the more accessible a firearm is, the less secure it is. The more secure it is, the longer it's going to take you to get it. So it really depends on what you feel you need. And obviously, people who say, I live in a small town where nothing ever happens. Something can happen. So, and it's not to make people paranoid, and it's not to say that like you need to always, have multiple firearms at the ready to go at all times. But it's just something to kind of keep in mind that like no place is 100% safe all the time. But obviously, if you live in a very high crime neighborhood where where break-ins are really common, then you might need to have something that's more accessible, which means it's inherently less secure. So I'd be more of a fan. If you're going to have something with a combination, it should be a short, easy to remember combination for you. I also like the idea of biometric safes, where it's just you put your thumbprint on it and you're good to go. The criticism that most of the biometric safes get is that, well, if the battery dies or if the power goes out, then you can't access your firearm. The majority of the biometric safes that you'll see now have a backup key. So if the battery dies or the power goes out, which they'll give you a warning well ahead of time that the battery is getting low, so you have a chance to change it. So you shouldn't run into one of these situations. But right. And even the ones that plug into the wall usually have a battery backup. But then at least you can still have a key, provided once again that you know where it is and you can access it quickly. There's also the lock boxes that have they have 5 finger buttons, so you can set it to different finger touch combinations. So it's like, maybe I have thumb, index, and pinky. So I squeeze those 3 buttons and it pops open and you can access. So that isn't one that's going to be secure for long. So that's not, you wouldn't want to just leave your firearm at home in the box, especially if, once again, if you have kids, if your kids have friends over, if there's, other people within your house, then that's not something that's going to keep your firearm secure when you're not there. It's just something that will keep it from being accidentally accessed while you're there.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. And that's probably important for people to know if they're planning on buying one or want to add one to their home. That's really good.
But if you own, multiple different firearms, then having a gun safe is definitely a good idea. And one that's also secured to either the wall or the floor, because people love to steal guns, which we didn't touch a ton on car safety, but don't put firearm stickers on your car. It's not impressive, and it's just kind of, it basically is a big target on your car. Like, people think it acts as a deterrent, like, oh yeah, don't come near me, I've got a gun. People love to steal guns. Like, they're expensive, and contrary to what, a lot of times you hear, the black market is not always the easiest to find. So stealing a firearm to use in a crime is going to be the ideal way to go about it. So like, if you have a big Glock symbol on the back of your pickup truck, then somebody knows, hey, if I search this truck, I'm probably going to find a handgun. So I just don't think it's a good idea to advertise that you are a firearms owner, or that there's probably a firearm within this vehicle.
Same reason you don't make it known that you have cash on you when you go to like another country or something like that. It's exactly. It's just common sense. That's good.
Yeah, you don't want to stand out. And we talked a little bit the other day about kind of like the main reasons that people will purchase a firearm for self-defense, that they usually think of different scenarios. Mm-hmm. And it's usually, you're attacked in public by one or more person. You're involved in an active shooter situation in public, which, it's becoming more and more the norm lately. Shopping malls, concerts, all sorts of different events. Or attacked in your home by one or more people. So if you're out in public, and I'm not a fan of people who, and once again, personal preference, you do what you want, but just if you're going to open carry, having your firearm exposed on your hip, some people think that it's going to act as a visual deterrent to violence or crime.
Mm-hmm.
That if somebody walked in and goes, I'm going to rob this place, or I'm going to shoot up this place, and there's a person with a gun, the gun owner, their thought is, I'm going to be a visual deterrent, that person's going to see me and they're going to think again about it. And maybe if you have somebody who's not really committed to doing what they're doing, but if you have somebody who is genuinely like, I'm going to rob this place, or I'm going to commit a mass act of violence here, you're now the first target. So it's something, it's kind of the idea that like locked doors only keep out honest people. That if somebody really wants to commit crime, if somebody really wants to be violent, they're going to. That you just being there, with a pistol on your hip, you're not going to dissuade them from doing what it is they're planning to do.
You better know damn well how to use it. Definitely sure that this podcast will help people know how to use it and help give them some things to think about. Say again?
I hope so. Yeah, and that was some we touched upon briefly back when we first started talking, but it was the idea of choosing a firearm for your home. Is that to decide based on how close your neighbors are, as far as like the over penetration issue that we talked about. So if you're in a farm in the middle of nowhere, then you don't have to worry about the rounds going through the wall out into your neighbor's house. You do, obviously, if you have your spouse or your kids in other rooms, then obviously that's something to deal with when choosing both your firearm and the ammunition that you're going to use. But there's if you're in an apartment building, your neighbor's right there, so you got to make sure that you're not going to overpenetrate. So that's where things like a shotgun can be beneficial, as long as you're not loading slugs. You're probably not going to go through the wall. Birdshot is not really designed for killing, but it'll certainly be painful and definitely a deterrent. Buckshot will do a lot of damage and probably won't go through the wall quite as much. Versus, if you're, a lot of people have been fans of, the AR-15s and things like that. That now you've got max speed, so you have max penetration, so that obviously could be way more of an issue. So, and kind of like we talked about that, like if you have very narrow hallways or narrow doorways, then a long gun might not be as wieldy for maneuvering through your house as you need to. So obviously, like the handgun's going to be the most maneuverable, but it's once again it's really an individual choice, and there's a whole lot of factors that go into deciding what you're going to carry, how many you're going to own, how you're going to secure them. We just really want people to be safe and to try to educate themselves as much as possible when making these kind of choices.
Yes, please. Education is severely important.
And then kind of circling back around, if I go a little bit to the defensive course, if you can get the opportunity to train at a course that lets you do some hands-on work, so where you have a person actively trying to either physically harm you or to take your firearm from you, that adds a whole nother element to things that most people never deal with, because for a lot of people, they just have this idea that I have a gun, I can defend myself at all times. But if somebody is in too close to you for you to be able to draw and to get on target fast enough, then now you're in a pretty sticky situation. Or if you don't know how to just keep your hand on the butt of your pistol and shove it down hard into your holster so somebody else can't take it from you, that's something that needs to be practiced. Then being able to defend yourself off with your free arm, with using your legs. So there's a lot of the hand-to-hand stuff that comes into play way more than people want to give it credit for. They think, well, I have a gun, I'm safe, that's it. When it's not always necessarily the case. And even kind of taking a step back from that choosing to carry is a huge responsibility in and of itself. That if you and I are out in a bar and neither of us is armed and we get in a fight, it could still go badly, but it still is just two unarmed people in a fist fight. If either of us has a gun, now it's an armed confrontation. Even if it's concealed, even if I had no intention of drawing it, the fact that now you and I are in a fight, I have brought a firearm to the fight, which means that it could potentially come into play. So it's a huge responsibility that comes up. Which I'm too old to go looking for fights at any point anyway. But it's it's a thing that I think a lot of people don't think about.
I'm sure we can find a spot. Tonight's New Year's at the time that we're recording this podcast. I'm sure we can go find a spot if you're interested. Just kidding. Yeah, man.
I'm glad.
Cut out again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As with most things this year, okay. I said, yeah, I don't have anything to prove to anybody. I don't gotta fight anybody. My ego is fully in check, and as with most things this year, this New Year's is going to be quiet and at home, and just me and the girlfriend. So
Very
no
good.
need to be out at the party.
I'll probably just be at home myself with my mom and my dad doing something. So that'll be good.
Rockstar life, man.
Rockstar, man. Real quick, let's take it to a kind of more like we've been talking a lot of serious and specific subjects, which is obviously important for the nature of our discussion. But I wanted to kind of take an opportunity to mention some of our favorite films that feature guns, so like stuff along the lines of shoot 'em up or gunslinger films. Two of my favorite ones. This, I like the John Wick movies a lot, especially because of seems like, I mean, that's kind of like the most like I feel like it's the most modern one that has come out, and it's a lot of those situations in that movie aren't very realistic, but the way that the weapons are handled and dealt with, I feel like are to an extent. Like because I know that Keanu Reeves. I feel like he did some kind of specific training for that with professionals, and it certainly seems like it. Obviously, it's just there's so much action and gore in that movie, and I appreciate it a ton. Equilibrium is another one. I think I feel like John Wick might have been inspired by Equilibrium a little bit, but Equilibrium's a lot more on the unrealistic side. That one's just like gun fu and like mixing the martial arts a ton with that, and it's just a futuristic world, and it's a really cool film for me.
Oh yeah, it's definitely there's definitely a lot of George Orwell 1984 kind of influence on that, and obviously that was right after the Matrix, so everybody was all about that kind of style. The long black trench coats and swinging guns and kung fu mixed in with your handguns. I love the John Wick movies too. Those are great. Like he did a lot of 3D training with some big time experts. So working with both his pistol, his rifle, and his shotgun, and transitioning between those three platforms very quickly. And you can see that in his movements. And same thing. Obviously, I love jujitsu. He trained a lot of jujitsu with the Machado brothers, and you can see a lot of that played out in his hand to hand work that he does there. But if I had to choose like my favorite as far as for like just silly fun is Desperado, with Antonio Banderas, where he's living like up on countertops, just like swinging guns back and forth, and he's got the guitar case full of guns, and it's just kind of ridiculous. Like I said, I love Terminator.
Terminator, obviously love those movies. When Arnold Schwarzenegger
Only
shows,
the first two.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget everything else.
3, 4, 5, and however many more 8, 9 that they came out with doesn't matter.
It should be done. Hopefully,
they need to figure out. I maybe they don't. They just need to stop that and move on to the next thing that they can. I don't think they're probably not slated to come out with any more films for that.
No, the last one was, I think, lost a ton of money. So
even with Arnold coming back,
yeah, and Linda Hamilton, but yeah, neither of them were able to save it.
Well, I think we talked about a lot of really good stuff today, and this was a really important episode for a bunch of people. And I think it's you're right as an American to defend yourself and have that safeguard. Like you're not always going to need it, of course. And even if you're not always going to need it, it's a really good thing to have. So this episode shed a lot of light for people, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. And the one caveat I would add to that is that if you are going to have it, then you got to learn how to use it properly and store it
Mhm.
properly. Having it without having the knowledge of how to use it and how to store it is more dangerous, I think, than not having it at all. But yeah, that's a long discussion for another day.
Yeah, I like that though. That's a good way to that's a good way to close it up. As having it and not knowing how to use it is more dangerous than not having it at all. So perfectly summed up, sir. Thank you.
All right, my
All
man.
right. Yeah, Shelby, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time, and I really hope to do it again with you sometime in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to you starting up your own podcast, and can't wait to see where that goes. And I want you to have me on there sometime. That would be cool. So
Absolutely. Would love to, man. That'd be great.
cool. All right. Well, I'll see you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, man. You too.